What's up everyone, Mark here and welcome to a long overdue video that's been over a year in the making. Now when I first started planning my little maple syrup project, I wasn't sure whether to frame it as a roadside kitchen or a project lab or even a taste lab episode. Old school fans of the channel know that recipe videos were a much bigger part of what I was doing for a while, but in the end it gets really hard to keep things original and interesting since there are a million people making the same cooking videos all over YouTube. So from here on out, on the occasion that you do see a Roadside Kitchen episode, I want it to be about the foods, recipes, and cooking techniques that are specific to Rhode Island or one of our nearby New England neighbors. Now planting a flag of local or even national identity on one's maple syrup certainly isn't anything new. There's Maine maple syrup and Vermont maple syrup and Rhode Island maple syrup too. It's possible there's nobody more serious about their syrup than the entire country of Canada, who proudly feature the maple leaf on their national flag. Here in America, every New England state, in fact, has its own Maple Producers Association. And anywhere that there are maple trees and the conditions are right, it's possible to collect sap and make your own real maple syrup. Before we get started, I'm excited to let you know that with the release of this video, I'm also kicking off my channel's first contest. If you're interested in winning your very own 12-ounce bottle of my homemade syrup, then stay tuned until the end for details on how to enter. Now really quick, I've broken this video down into chapters with timestamp links down in the description so you can skip around if you want to. And if you don't care about the science or the background info at all, you can jump to this time for the sap collection or this time for the syrup making. I've also included links to all of the particular items and tools I've used to help you get started, but as I explain later, there are plenty of opportunities to DIY certain aspects for cheap or even free. First, the science. In colder climates, deciduous trees, that's non-evergreens, enter a period of dormancy every winter. Triggered by decreasing temperatures and fewer daylight hours in autumn, the trees prepare by turning off food production, recapturing nutrients from the leaves, and finally shedding them, leaving the branches bare. At the same time, the tree also prepares for next season by developing the buds which will become next year's foliage. And even though growth mostly stops during dormancy, with temperatures well below freezing, root growth can and does continue, helping to build capacity for new growth above ground in the spring and summer. What determines the window of opportunity for sap collection is a function of both temperature and timing. Sap begins to flow within the tree near the end of its winter dormancy cycle. When the temperature drops below freezing at night, water inside the living cells of the tree's wood fiber begins to freeze. As it freezes, the cells dehydrate, which in turn creates a negative osmotic pressure or suction on the adjacent vessels that transport sap. This suction pulls more water in through the tree's root system to restore the pressure balance. The following day, as the air temperature increases, the trapped ice crystals melt, creating a positive pressure that pushes water back into those same vessels. By drilling holes, we can literally tap into that pressure and use it to push some of the water out into a collection bucket. Now at this point, it isn't really water anymore, it's sap. What makes it sap is the fact that on its way into, around, and back out of the tree, it picked up some of the tree's nutrients in the form of sugars, as well as a few minerals and other things. It's this repeated freeze and thaw cycle that really drives sap flow, but timing is just as important. You might wonder why you can't collect sap at other times of year when the temperature patterns are the same, like the transition time between autumn and winter. Well, the reason is simply that the tree's metabolism isn't producing sap then, or if it is, it contains too much other stuff to make for good tasting syrup. It's only after the winter reaches its coldest point, late January in my part of the northern hemisphere, when the trees, sensing the increasing temperatures and hours of daylight, begin transitioning out of dormancy. As the days progress, temperatures become too warm to continue the cycle of pushing sap, and the sap itself is becoming more enriched with nutrients while the tree is getting ready to open its buds. Again, this would make for poor tasting syrup, and so it signals the end of the maple syrup season. Collecting sap doesn't hurt the tree at all, as long as we do it responsibly. It's best to only tap trees with a trunk diameter of at least 1 foot. In fact, a single maple tree can typically support as many taps as the trunk is wide in feet, up to a total of about 6. One thing you don't have to worry about is the specific type of maple tree. As long as it's a maple, you can collect the sap and make syrup. And if the leaves look like the one on the Canadian flag, it's a maple. Some maple varieties are better than others, but in the scheme of things and at the scale at which we're working, it's not super significant. A sugar maple generally has a concentration of about 4% sugar in its sap, while most other maples have a concentration of about 2 or 3%. In either case, we'll be boiling off a lot of water when it comes time to make the syrup, and a difference of 1% or 2 will be negligible. For each tap, you're going to need 1 spile and 1 bucket. The spiles are a pretty specific and niche item, so it's probably best to buy them, although I suppose if you're particularly creative, you could try to make your own. If you do, by the way, I'd love for you to explain what you did down in the comments. Most spiles are made of metal or plastic, but sometimes can be made of ceramic or even wood. Essentially, they're just a hollow tapered tube with a spout at the end and a channel through which the sap is directed. Mine have hooks to hold onto the buckets too, but others are designed to have the bucket hang directly over the spile itself. The collection bucket can be any food-safe plastic or metal container that you can find a way to hang on or over the spile. The last couple of items you'll need are a drill and appropriately sized bit. For most spiles, including mine, this is a 5/16 inch diameter bit. Tap holes should only be drilled to a depth of about 1.5 inches. So to help with this, I've just marked the bit with a piece of blue painter's tape to help give me an easy visual. The hole should be in a clear, flat area that's somewhere between 2 and 4 feet above the ground and drilled at a slight upward angle to help the sap flow out more easily. If necessary, it's perfectly okay to knock off any loose bits of bark that may interfere with either drilling the hole or with tap insertion. Next, just place the spile in the hole and tap it into place until it bottoms out and feels solid. Don't overdrive it or you could damage the spile or the tree. And remember, every tool's a hammer. Lastly, hang your bucket and you're on your way. Your collection bucket can be any food-safe material like metal or plastic. A clean 5-gallon bucket with a hole drilled near the top works. Just make sure that the hole is large enough to fit over the spile or hook, depending on the type of spile you're using. The collection buckets I use are designed as a system with compatible spiles and an integrated lid to keep rainwater, leaves, and other things out. Again, links to all of this stuff can be found down in the description. The next thing you need to consider, and hopefully by this point in the process you've already thought about it, is where and how you're going to store all your sap until you're ready to boil it. The sap is best kept cold, so the refrigerator or freezer work if you've got the space, but you're going to need a lot of space. Depending on the weather, the average outdoor temperature may be cool enough for the sap to keep perfectly well outdoors. Above all else, it shouldn't be left to sit in the sun or get too warm. I chose to store my sap in 5-gallon buckets on an enclosed porch, where the winter temperature remains fairly consistent and cold throughout the day and night. It's my understanding that the 5-gallon buckets sold at Home Depot and Lowe's are considered food safe, but you may be able to find cheap or even free buckets by asking around at supermarkets and restaurants. In any case, always make sure your containers and buckets are food safe and never reuse buckets which previously contained non-food chemical products. Because it's going to take between 40 and 60 parts of sap to make 1 part of finished syrup, it's particularly important that you collect as much sap as possible before starting your boil. I collected sap for roughly 2 weeks at a time, collecting approximately 25 gallons from 3 taps at each go before boiling. Over 2 boils, I produced about a gallon of finished syrup, 10 12-ounce bottles. Boiling the sap is simple enough, but it can get a little messy. Boiling on your stovetop indoors is not recommended unless you have a very powerful vent hood, since the steam tends to leave a sticky, sugary residue on everything it touches. For my syrup, I boiled it outdoors using a propane turkey fryer, only bringing the syrup indoors for finishing once it was significantly reduced. Your sap should be filtered for the first time prior to boiling. This is how you get out the bugs and any tiny debris. There are nylon fiber filters specifically designed for this, but you can get away with using a paper coffee filter at this stage. I filter mine as I transfer it from the collection buckets into the storage buckets, so it's ready to go well before the boil. The trick to turning all of this sap into syrup is heat and time. Water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, at least at sea level. And for most of the boil, the temperature isn't going to go any higher than that. As the sap level in the boiler drops, I periodically top it off with more sap until it's all been added. Progressively smaller pots can be used to make things easier as the sap reduces. The temperature will start to rise very quickly as it nears finishing, and at 219 degrees, it's finished syrup. It's extremely important to monitor the temperature closely, or the whole batch can quickly burn. If needed, you can save a batch of syrup that's starting to overheat by quickly mixing in some cold water, but of course that also partly resets the clock on your boiling time. I used oven-safe remote probe thermometers suspended in the pot on a stick to keep track of the temperature. If the temperature started to drop, it was a sign that either the level of the sap was dropping below the thermometer or the propane needed to be changed. If it started to rise, it meant that it was time to start watching it more closely. When the amount remaining was small enough to bring inside, at around 216 degrees, it was time to filter for the second time. This go-around involves 2 of the nylon filters nested in one another as the syrup is transferred into a smaller pot for finishing. Filtering in the later stages isn't strictly necessary either, but it does remove the coagulated minerals left over from the sap that would otherwise make the syrup a little gritty, if still completely harmless. Once it was dialed in at 219 degrees, I took the extra step of using a maple syrup hygrometer to verify that enough water had been boiled off in order to make it proper syrup. The hygrometer isn't terribly expensive, and it works simply by floating in a deep test cup of syrup. The level at which it floats determines the sugar concentration corresponding to the gradation marks on the inside of the tube. This step isn't strictly necessary, but it can avoid problems caused by syrup spoiling due to a lower than required sugar concentration. At this stage, the syrup needs one more round of filtering, this time using a nylon filter nested inside another filter made from thick wool felt. All of these filters are reusable, though they need to be hand washed in plain warm water, and you don't want to use any kind of soap or detergent. The finished syrup can then be hot packed into any clean and dry glass containers with tight sealing lids. The syrup has to be packed while it's still hot, at least 190 degrees, in order for the heat to sterilize the container. After sealing, invert the containers so that the hot syrup floods the area around the lid, and keep them that way as they cool. Once cooled, the syrup can be stored at room temperature near indefinitely, though it should be refrigerated once the original seal is broken. It may seem like a long road to get here, but the trip is well worth the sweet satisfaction of the first time you pour some of your own homemade maple syrup on your next French toast, pancakes, or waffles. You can avoid doing all of this work yourself, of course, if you just win the contest for a bottle of my syrup. The sweepstakes will remain open from the time this video is published on January 2nd until 11:59 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, January 31st. To enter, all you have to do is visit the sweepstakes link down in the description and follow the instructions. Just visiting and subscribing to my YouTube channel gets you 1 entry, and additional bonus entries are available for visiting and liking some of my social media accounts. So again, make sure you take a few seconds to enter the sweepstakes before January 31st. There's one catch. In order to accept the prize if you win, you'll need to have a physical address in either the United States, Canada, or the United Kingdom for the bottle to be sent to. Thank you all so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you learned something, and I hope you were inspired to try making your own maple syrup this coming season. It'd mean a lot if you take a second to give the video a thumbs up if you found it interesting, or a thumbs down if you didn't. And either way, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel for more new videos all the time. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.